Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. We are in our intermission period here between the two acts of Merrily We Roll Along, and you are in for one of the biggest treats. I had the huge honor of sitting down and talking with Morrison, the original Mary from Merrily We Roll Along. This is maybe one of my favorite episodes that I've ever recorded. She sings at me, folks. She sings at me. So I want to get into this as soon as possible. Here's my conversation with Morrison.
Charlie, why can't it be like it was? I liked it the way that it was. Charlie, you and me, we were nicer then. We were nice.
Morrison, thank you so much for joining me here today.
I'm so tickled that you invited me to be with you today.
I did a little bit of reading up on you, and I guess now you can fact check the internet to see if what I read is actually true. Is it true?
It's from the internet, so what can you say?
Yeah, I am the person who believes everything that they read, so I have to believe it. But
great.
It says that your family started a summer theater program, a summer theater company. So was it just assumed you'd be a performer, or was it actually something you wanted to do?
Hey, I was blessed by growing up with a musical theater family, but they taught in college. So my dad was a music professor, and he taught everything from music appreciation to theory to you name it. And my dad was a combination of Danny Kaye and Victor Borge as a teacher. He was hilarious. He did most of his teaching in lecture form, but students for years, even to this day, students will say, I don't know how. I don't remember taking down the notes, because he was so funny, but we did. And my mother was a bit of a Renaissance woman herself. She was a modern dancer, a choreographer, a director, a playwright, a lyricist, a poet. She designed hats, she designed plates. They collaborated. They wrote 3 ballets, 1 opera, 3 musicals, art songs.
Okay.
And I thought that was normal. So in many of the places that they went moving from colleges, they ended up at George Williams College in the Chicago area. It moved out to Downers Grove, and George Williams College had a campus up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, on the lake there. It was so beautiful. And my dad at the time was asked to kind of head the music wing of the summer camp. They had this beautiful Luluth Hall. And my mom also, because of their arts, she brought dancers from all over the world. I mean, it was quite fun. And they decided to start this little theater company for the summer. It was really a great place for me to start learning about summer stock on that level. And a lot of the Goodman students from Chicago, if they did anything to do for the summer, were coming up there as well. It was a great training ground. We had to work for the college in the morning. We'd rehearse in the afternoon and then do performances in the evening. So I knew at 5 I was going to be an actress. I had albums, and I would put them on the turntable and choreograph, stage, and costumed all of them.
Amazing. What were those albums? What were your first influences?
Well, at the age of 7, I had all the West Side Story choreographed stage costume. And I was a little bit disappointed when I saw it because I thought my staging was much better.
I like that. Just like knock on the choreographer's door at 7. It's like, I have some notes.
I have some notes.
Well, I was going to say, like, what's nice about that, with that background is I hear from so many people who are artists or actors or whatever it is. I didn't know that this was something you could do. Like, it took me a long time to realize, you can actually go and make a living. And I had to convince my parents that I could go and make a living at doing this thing. But your parents were making a living out of it.
Call it a living?
Yeah, well, sure.
It's a living when you're working. When you're not working, it's something else. But yeah, it's, my folks were very fine about encouraging me if that's what I wanted to do. If it was something I didn't want to do, they were fine about that as well. But I just kind of went into the family business in a way.
Yeah.
It's interesting, my first introduction to Sondheim was with my dad introducing me to West Side Story. I got to hear Gypsy. So I got to know him first as a lyricist. And I was given, I love solo theater. In fact, I have a theater company down here called Sarah Solo Productions. And we help develop people who want to do solo theater. And it's all solo theater art. So I will introduce people to solo cabaret, to me, which is more like a little mini musical. Then this next song was written by kind of thing. Solo plays, it could be physical theater, it could be performance art, it could be spoken word, whatever that causes someone to come on stage and through storytelling in a theatrical venue or sense, come forward. And cabaret work, I'm very, very fond of. Most people will say, well, Annie, you're not really a cabaret performer. You do theater pieces. And I say, hey, good cabaret should be a theater piece. So I was given the assignment to come back to 54 Below after not doing cabaret work for a very, very long time. And the producer that wanted to produce that particular show said, I'm going to give you an assignment. You can only sing Sondheim and Bernstein.
Oh.
And I said, okay.
When was this?
Oh, gosh, this must have been, I want to say 2016, maybe? No, it would have been earlier than that, but right around there. And okay, so sure. And I had not sung cabaret in Manhattan for about 28 years. I said, but I'm also a storyteller. So I'm going to tell my story of what I've been doing since those 28 years.
Sure.
But I can only sing Sondheim and Bernstein. And I found ways to weave things together. Sometimes I wouldn't finish things completely because it filtered into how I was going to bridge the next thing. You can go on YouTube and there's a couple of things from that show you can look at. So yeah, my first introduction, my dad, being a music professor, loved sitting down with someone and really giving you a music appreciation. And I really...
I was going to ask if you ever went to one of his lectures, but he probably couldn't do that at home.
Oh my God, yeah, I did. But I love that he would sit with me and, he's long gone. But I will be driving in the car and I have to pull the car to the side of the road because a piece of music came on there where he sat with me and said, okay, listen to the violins come in here. How does it make you feel? Or listen to the way Sondheim has wedded this particular lyric to this particular piece of music. It was quite thrilling, quite fun. So to be able to do that in a cabaret setting, to sit down and have him really explain to me that relationship to lyric and music was quite fun. So when I work with someone as a doing vocal performance, quite often we'll separate the lyric and the music to see what different pieces of information you get from that before you put it back together again.
What it sounds like, I mean, I guess I don't know enough of the history of this, but like when you were school age, college, university, was there any such thing as like, I'm going to go and get a major in musical theater? Was that even a thing?
Now I'm 67 years old.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, when I did Merrily on Broadway, I had to lie about my age. So New York thinks I'm 5 years younger than I really am.
Right.
I think it's funny. But no, so I went to college in 1974, and in the United States, they were just starting musical theater programs in college. And I wanted to go to the Boston Conservatory of Music, and it was like, I think, their first year of doing it. And I got there, and I was a little disappointed. Maybe it's because I was a big fish in a small pond. I wanted to not be a big fish. I wanted to be a small, I wanted to grow and grow and grow. And I didn't think, I don't know if it was because they just hadn't had it together yet with how to put that program. I didn't feel challenged. I remember calling my dad. And when I tell some people the story and they're appalled that my college professor father would give me this advice. He said, are you going to college because your parents are college professors? Because that's a stupid reason. If it's something that you really love to do, why don't you leave that school and learn it the way you feel that's right for you. And now my dad was a college professor when college was not a thing you had to do to get a job.
Right.
College was something you did to better yourself. So I'm sure that's where a lot of his advice was coming from. But and I did. I've tried to figure out how I wanted to learn. I ended up going to New York and studying at Herbert Berghoff Studios and working with people like Uta Hagen and Rita Gardner and Aaron Frankel and Charles Nelson Riley.
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah.
He was a brilliant teacher. As funny as he was a brilliant teacher.
In what ways? Like, how was he able to teach you?
His ability to be in the moment was great. And I loved his love of props, good prop acting. I don't see that anymore. I go into theater and I go, what, did they give you the prop like a week before you had to open?
Right.
No idea what relationship you can have with that bottle that says everything about something. I mean, he was a master at that. But to be in the room with Uta Hagen.
I was going to say, like, that must have been a trip. Yeah.
You were in the room with people who, what I liked about the place is that I wasn't going to get a degree from it. I just wanted to better myself. And I was in the room with people who were on Broadway or going off, or the teacher was going to be gone for a few weeks because they had to go direct somewhere. I was learning. I was a small fish and I had to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And that's what I appreciated.
to psychoanalyze it, it almost feels like you had that entry-level education from your father already. So going off to college and be like, yeah, I kind of know this stuff, right? I've kind of achieved this level of insight already. You kind of had to get into that learn to do by doing sort of thing.
He's kind of lucky to have them because this was before the internet. This was before YouTube and all this. I mean, YouTube, what a great tool this is.
Yes,
yeah. I've been going in my classrooms working with persons, one of the performing arts high schools here, we teach solo theater development. It's now part of their curriculum. I can go to a YouTube and say, okay, now let's look. We're going to look at Bette Midler today, and we're going to look at her in 1976. I know you think she just did Hocus Pocus, but she was, listen to her monologue that she created about the fried egg on your head that leads into Hello in there. And we really sit down and analyze the brilliance of that. So it's a lot of us. I really attribute my folks to having that ability, but because in those days we didn't. So he would tell me all about Beatrice Lilly because he'd seen her perform and describe it to me. I might have had a chance to see her on the Ed Sullivan Show,
right?
But I remember doing a tribute to her, doing Fairies in the Bottom of My Garden, and I just did what my dad described because he was so good at describing it. That people said, "When did you see Beatrice Lilly perform?" I said, "Up here in my head."
The theater of my mind.
And I used my imagination because I had such good parents who were really good about helping me find that information. Now you got like this wonderful tool. So, yeah.
This is so interesting to talk with you because I feel like we have a bit of a similarity in one way, which is like my parents always encouraged me to like find out information. Like I was getting into Broadway and classic film. And I would ask questions, and if they didn't know the answer, again, sort of pre-internet, they would find me resources or books, or they would go and rent the movie to such a degree that nowadays it almost feels like I should have been born 40 years before I am because I just have references. I know different things that no one even my own age understands what I'm talking about sometimes.
And what disappoints me about young people now is they have a computer that they walk around in their hands all the time. So they're kind of losing the ability to look at your face and understand language there, or really listen to you because they're doing this, typing on this little computer they carry around their hand. But they have this computer and they know so little.
It is wild to me. It's like I would have killed for something like this to be this quick, this easy, to be able to see it or experience it or read it.
Well, and maybe now let's think about this for a minute. It might be because when we were growing up, we didn't have that tool. So we had to find a compartment in our brain to keep it. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to nowadays. You can always find it when you need it. So there's no reason to keep it up here. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's just something we have to keep.
Can you tell me about some of your early roles then? Like you're here in New York City, like you said, experiencing all these people that had Broadway experience, were going off to do their own shows. But what were your first few forays into professionalism?
Well, first I have to tell you a funny story about growing up with my folks, because I was dragged into the theater kicking and screaming.
Sure.
Kicking like Ethel, like a chorus line, and screaming like Ethel Merman. But I loved it. And quite often, sometimes, and I was put in all the shows, whether I was a little kid, being the balloon girl in Carnival, or little chap's son in Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, or as I got older, I was always in the college shows that would pull me, because I had a very mature voice, singing voice. In fact, when I was younger, it was a color tour. I can't hit any of those notes now. But back at the time, I had this huge range and a maturity. I mean, my mom came in and I said, I want to do Old Maid from 110 The Shade for You. I was 11 years old, and I performed it for her, and she said, wait a minute, how old are you? How do you understand that song? I said, I don't know, I just do. So I remember did a production of Company, and this is before we saw Company, because that was my first Broadway show, was see Company at the Alvin Theater, where Merrily then finally opened. So I was just kind of hanging around, and they lost the character that was going to play Amy. I don't know what happened, but so I got dragged in to play Amy in the show. And then the girl that was supposed to dance the TikTok dance, because in the original, it was all this insane, stupid song that Donna McKechnie got to perform. I had to do, and I had to do it very quickly. Well, the only kind of dance I had was my mom's modern dance that she taught at college. So here I am doing this. Martha Grandish kind of, it was just so silly. So by the time I got to New York, I ended up back I ended up in Florida in 1978 thinking that I was going to go into the Burt Reynolds Jupiter Theater's. They didn't have it ready yet, so we had to wait a year. So I went over to Sarasota, Florida, and auditioned for the Oslo Repertory Theater because they had a children's tour that went out for a whole year. So they gave me something new, and I got into it and loved working that because everything I do, I feel like I've learned another thing that always feeds in what's going to happen next in my life. And there's something about being in front of children, some of them being rural, some of them being urban, that taught me so much about how to be break the fourth wall in a way that you had to tell the truth because children need it. And you can't lie to them.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, like, is there a fundamental difference between performing for children and adults?
I think so. I think it was fascinating. And never to talk down to them, to make them excited about the theater. Because some of them, that was the first experience. I remember a little girl coming up to me after doing a performance in some little funny little town. And she came up and she touched me and she said, "Oh my God, you're real." She didn't say God. She said, "Oh my goodness, you're real." Because she'd only seen maybe something on television, maybe a film. But to have someone in front of her that she could actually touch blew her mind. So anyway, we finished that and I went off to the Burt Reynolds Jupiter Theater. And it was slave labor, really was. I mean, but it was the best year of my life. It really was fantastic because Burt was bringing in TV stars, he was bringing in film stars, and he was bringing theater stars, Broadway stars down.
Yeah.
And sometimes they had to intermingle together.
And like, was there a different show every month? Like, what was the schedule like?
Regular, a run, I guess of like 2 or 3 weeks a show.
Yeah, okay.
Now, to earn your equity card in an apprenticeship, you had to do 52 weeks or 5 equity shows, and I ended up doing both, which was great. But I got to watch people like Martin Sheen come in, who had just got off of Apocalypse Now, the film.
Yeah.
And he's a method actor, so he was still in this intense world of, Apocalypse, but couldn't have been nicer. He walked around the theater and introduced himself to the janitors. It was a dinner theater, so he went and got to meet the dishwasher, all the cooks. He was a pleasant, beautiful, sweet man, and I thought that's the kind of person I want to be if I become. I don't want to ever be those other people. The television people that came in if they'd only done television, they didn't know how to be nice to anybody. I mean, they were pull things out of people were trying to dress someone's hands. They didn't know how to put makeup on. They needed someone to put it on for them. And film stars that came in who had a background in theater couldn't wait to get back on stage again because it's a whole other communication we can have an audience night by night, and anything can go wrong. Film actors and TV actors who haven't had a lot of theater training are terrified of it because something can go wrong and it's up to you to take, and you can't just stop and then somebody's going to fix it.
Can't do a take two, yeah.
No. So it was fascinating. I remember there's a wonderful experience with Martin Sheen and Julie Kavner. We've known her as the voice of Marge Simpson, but she was a wonderful little actress.
She was in Rhoda, though, too, was she not?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much so. They were doing, I think it was 2 for the Seesaw. Martin would come out of his dressing room, and he would have, because the show, they had to run up 5 flights of stairs to be in her apartment, right? So he would come out of his dressing room, and he would have to do about 100 push-ups to assimilate the feeling of running up the stairs, and he'd open the door and go in, Julie would come out of her dressing room. She'd get her purse off the prop table. She'd go up to the door, get ready to go in, and she'd turn to me and say, "Oh, by the way, there's a party at my house tonight." Open the door, and they'd be in the same play. So it's just different approaches, and I just love that. I love that.
That's amazing. By the way, I should ask, which way do you lean? Are you more method, or are you just more like, I can turn this on off? No.
I come from the world of make-believe. You should pretend and imagine and experience it. And I'm very connected to my emotional body. Apparently, according to my mom, I've been connected to my emotional body in a very wise way at a very young age. And I love my feelings. And so I can call them up like that and not feel like I've taxed anything, or I don't have to think of a dead dog. If anything, I think of something joyous and the tears come down my face, Right. If you're in the text and you're telling the story, it just, for me, it just comes up automatically. So I don't have to do any of that living in a character. Well, that's not quite true. I think when I did Merrily We Roll Along, and we'll get into that, when I played Mary Flynn, I felt like there were times I was bringing Mary Flynn home. And that's when I had to learn that, no, you don't do that. No. Right, Mary stays in the dressing room and on stage, and Annie goes home, and Annie has a life, and Annie doesn't have to emulate Mary Flynn in any sort of way. But after finishing the Burt Reynolds Jupiter Theater, he had Dinah Shore. She had a television show at the time. And he invited her down for the whole week. And they had people flying in and blah, 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 and what have you. And he featured each one of us apprentices because we had just earned our equity card. He asked us to stay that week. So the time that I came out, I sang I Can Cook Too. Leonard Bernstein, right?
Oh, I can cook too, on top of the rest. My seafood's the best in the town. Yes, I can cook too. My fish can't be beaten. My sugar's the sweetest around. I'm a man's ideal of a perfect meal, right down to the demi-tasse. I'm a pot of joy for a hungry boy, baby. I'm cooking with gas, so I'm a gum.
And at the time, I could sing a high C. So I finished doing it, the whole little bit, and he said to Dinah Shore and on television, of all the apprentices, Anne's going to be the one on Broadway within a year. He was off 6 months.
Pretty close, pretty close.
Right. So I went straight to New York, and very briefly, very quickly, I got in my first off-Broadway show in an audition called Dreamtime, which was a pared-down version of a musical called Swing that didn't do very well. In fact, I don't think and it was they turned it into a 3-character show. So I got to work with people like Robert Waldman, and Alfred Urey, who wrote the book, and Robert Lapone, who directed it, Patti LuPone's brother.
Yeah.
So that was fun. And then the next thing I know, I was auditioning and I got into my first regional play, which was a brand new musical called Keystone, another Mac and Mabel story, because I would like to audition for a show called Merrily We Roll Along, but I was too old. I was 25, and they wanted people between the ages of 16 and 20. But going off to do that show, they had not found their Mary Flynn yet. And somehow it might have been the producers of Keystone that suggested, I think we got someone you should take a look at. And I was flown down to audition for Joanna Merlin, who was the casting director. She said, I think Hal Prince needs to see you because we still don't have our Mary Flynn, which didn't mean anything to me, you know.
Right.
All right. They wanted me to come back the next weekend, and I had one more week, and then my show Keystone would be done. I was never one of those actors that was so hungry I would pile one thing on top of the other because I was so hungry to get the next job. I really just wanted to complete something and do the next thing and complete something and do the next thing. But I asked the Prince office, would it be right if I could just come back the following week? And everyone around me was horrified that I would tell the Prince office what I wanted. But the Prince office wrote back and said, sure, we'll see you the following week, you know? And the following week, I ended up on set of Evita, which Hal Prince was
still running, yeah.
Because in those days, you could audition on Broadway stages, you know?
Right.
And can you imagine what that must have been like, casting a show to have an actor come from the wings, take center stage? You know immediately if they could act the space, and then watch them leave, how they would leave. That said so much than these small rooms that we ended up in. And now you just have to film yourself on a phone.
Film yourself and send it in, right? And
you have to just hope that the person you cast can actually fill the stage, you know. So it was an interesting experience. So I came on, and of course the set of Evita had a very high rake. In fact, they had to change the ruling on rakes because people were being injured from that rake. Dancers would be, and I didn't know any better. I came out on heels, you know. And what did I say? I could too. On top of the rest, my sea boots bouncing down, right? Okay. I was terrified I was going to fall into the pit more than I was terrified about auditioning for Hal Prince, and Ruthie Mitchell was his assistant. They were the other two people out there. So Hal gets all excited. He runs up the aisle screaming, Ruthie, that's what I'm talking about. And he comes up and he's like, Anne, can you come back in 2 weeks? Because Steve's in Mallorca. And I went, sure. Which later happened to be my birthday. And so now on my birthday, I'm back on the set of Evita, this time in flat.
Huge rake, yeah.
And the only person out there is Stephen Sondheim.
Oh, boy.
And he couldn't have been more wonderful. I don't know how else to put it. Because I was assuming he would be a tough, I heard he didn't like kids. I don't know what we heard that from. Not that I was a kid, but, you know, and he laughed at the things I said. He asked me all kinds of questions. He was writing things down. He asked how high I sang, because I just done singing a high C. And I said a high C, and he laughed, and he said, because I still have one more song to write for Mary Flynn. I said, oh, that's nice. He said, great, I'll see you the first day of rehearsal, and he leaves.
So he was just double checking, basically, yeah.
Did I just get a Broadway show for my birthday? And, oh my God, Stephen Sondheim's writing me a song. And the song he hadn't completed at that time was Now You Know. People will say, well, he wrote a song for the show. But I think it was probably David Loud who was in the show with me. Years later, it was kind of became the next Paul Gimignani, who was our musical director then.
Right.
And is a wonderful, fantastic teacher. In fact, you should find David Loud's book. It just came out recently. A beautiful book. His 5 middle chapters on Merrily are wonderful. In fact, I would recommend interviewing every member of the original cast because we all had these amazing stories to tell.
Yeah,
I don't want to tell other people's stories because they're their stories.
No, for sure. To be honest with you, I am trying. Hi everyone, just Kyle breaking into the conversation to tell you about some of the people and organizations that help this show continue to go. If you would like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's, of course, greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make this show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. I also need to give a huge thank you to the God That's Good tier from Patreon of Jack, Todd, Robert, Louise, Christopher, Stephen, and Derek. Putting It Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Putting It Together is brought to you by Alberta Blue Cross. Even if you're a busy business owner with more meetings than hours in a day, you are calm and collected when your group benefit plan is taken care of by Alberta Blue Cross. Your employees can manage their own health, dental, life, and disability coverage online anytime on any device, making it easier for them and for you. To learn more and explore your options, head on over to ab.bluecross.ca. This episode is also brought to you by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider in Alberta, offering internet, electricity, and natural gas with low rates, awesome service, and profit sharing with local charities. You know, sometimes they say winter is coming. Well, winter is very definitely here in Alberta, and energy usage for all Albertans is going to be increasing. So now is a great time for listeners to look at their utility bills and ensure that they are on the best plan. Albertans have a choice who they pay their utility bills to. Park Power is happy to provide free, no obligations comparisons. If you decide to switch providers, it's easy, and you can feel good knowing you are supporting a local business and helping to give back to our communities with your utilities bills. You can learn more at parkpower.ca.
You know, we're all of us. After 40 some years, we are still best friends, old friends. Yeah. Still have a thread. We go to people's weddings. We try and, celebrate birthdays. We do whatever we can. And I don't think any other Broadway cast can boast that.
No.
I'm rambling all over. Where am I in my storytelling?
No, you're doing your audition process. So you've gone through, it sounds like you've gotten Merrily, even though they haven't told you that explicitly, of course.
Yeah, David Lau said, Annie, actually, he did kind of really write that for you, in a sense, because he was really paying attention to you, how you phrased in your speaking, how you spoke, how your interpretation of Mary was, because that helped him inform how he was going to write that song. Yeah. So I thought, oh, okay, all right. So in a way, I think, oh yeah, now you know it's kind of my song. There's wonderful lyrics in that I really resonate to. Like one of my favorite lyrics in there is, burn your bridges now and then or you'll never grow. Because now you grow. That's the killer, is now you grow. And I also love, even cream of wheat has lumps. I know. Isn't that great? I love that. I think that that line has been taken out of the newest version of Merrily, which breaks my heart. Of course it has, Yeah. Merrily's an interesting, funny thing. It just won't go away. In fact, next week I'm flying to Minneapolis to see Theater La Di Da's production of it. Were you able to get tickets for the Broadway version? Because it seems like no one was able to get tickets for that. It sold out really quick. I think I'm going to opening night. Okay. Well, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. My fingers crossed. That is the amazing thing about this show, right? And I think that the documentary, worst thing that ever could have happened, covers this a little bit. It's yes, it's considered this flop for many years. That's kind of the stigma that it has, but has grown into this thing that people really do adore and love. And it's put on all the time. I'm a cult star. People go nuts. Anne Morrison, can I have your autograph? And I go, really? Yeah. it's just one of those shows that, well, we got lots to talk about how I feel about Merrily, but it's interesting because the show cut out some things that I always wondered why. Well, I understand why on some level, but I'm sad for. They wanted to get rid of the bookend of the show, which was the graduation scene.
Hills of Tomorrow,
and it's partly because they wanted to focus in a different way from it. But I really missed Behold the Hills of Tomorrow. In fact, I just did a one-woman show. It's called Merrily from Center Stage. And I chose to begin, I do the score of Merrily pretty much, give and take a couple of things, and only maybe bits and pieces of stuff as I tell my story. And I choose it in the direction of it going backwards. So I begin opening my piece with Behold the Hills of Tomorrow, but I sing the part that's never recorded. Because there's a middle part, between the hills of tomorrow. At times the road may seem strange. The hills lie deep and the way is steep, but for those who dare, the world is there to change. Then raise the torch and seize the day. Behold, our banners fly to mark the way. Standards billowing, unsullied proud. Visions bright, voices loud. Beyond the hills of tomorrow. It goes right into it again, right? So it's such a thrill to hear because in a way that whole song kind of sums up the journey that they all felt as young people telling this story.
I feel justified, by the way, because I have gone to bat for the Hills of Tomorrow on the podcast. I do like some of the additions and changes in the like updated version, quote unquote, but I really miss those bookends. I think they're kind of needed.
So the end of my show, I also bookended after my feelings about something. I won't get into it because you may see the show today. But then I go into a cappella, singing without that middle verse, which is kind of the version that we did at the very end of the show.
Right.
Before hosting Hal and Steve.
For you at that time, though, like obviously, by the sounds of it, you knew who Hal Prince was. You knew who Stephen Sondheim was.
Oh, hell yeah, I grew up with them.
Yeah. Was Sondheim like revered for you, or just someone that you enjoyed? Like, what level was he to you?
Oh, I was terrified of meeting both of them because they were musical theater gods. I mean it. They were musical theater gods. That's how we felt about it. Bow to thee, bow to thee. But that wasn't. I mean, I'm pretty sure that it's in one of Sondheim's books because I know he said it out loud. That working on Merrily was one of the best times he's ever had. You really saw it. When he came in, I mean, he dressed like a kid. You know, he looked like a teenager when he would walk in. He was excited to be there, and he was so accessible. And I remember sitting down with him at the piano for the first time to figure out the keys to the show, starting to shake, and the shake went away because he was having so much fun, and it rubbed off on all of us. And the same with Hal Prince. I mean, Hal Prince became Uncle Hal. And I remember the first time Daisy Prince, who was his daughter, who was actually 16 at the time, wanted to make friends. And she wanted a bunch of us to come to her house. And I think, wait a minute, I'm going to the director's house? Oh, God, I hope he's not there. And so she, you know, I think it was Lonnie Price and a couple of other people. We were in there. And Hal came into the room. He said, hi, kids. Oh, I'll leave you guys alone.
Right.
Years later, after Merrily had closed, I mean, Hal brought me back to New York. First, I was asked back by Lonnie Price to do Children in Art, which was a celebration for Steve. And Hal Prince came to announce the three of us coming in to do Old Friends. So Lonnie and Jim and I do Old Friends quite often. In fact, we did it at Hal's Memorial. And I can tell you that in a minute. But so I did it. And Hal said, where have you been? I said, you know, I'm going off and having fun and learning this and creating that and teaching this and, you know, doing this show and that show. He said, well, I'd love to bring you back to Broadway. And so he brought me back for a musical called La Musique, which also didn't do very well.
But it has its fans. I will say, there's people that will go to bat for that show.
And originally, he told me that he realized after seeing the video of the three of us doing Old Friends, he said, I said, I think I made a mistake because he just wanted me to come and just do a reading of it. He said, I think you are my Lottie Lenya. So I came to New York and I was in his office and there was Alfred Urey who wrote the book. Again, I said, hi, Alfred, I haven't seen you in years. And I read and sang and they said, you sound just like her. You sound like just like her because I wanted to emulate her little high, little soprano voice. And then later in the show, bet down to her, you know, smoking, drinking voice. Well, we went through several workshops and it looked like it was going to be a go. And I get a call while I was down in Florida, from Hal saying that I think, we're going to have postponed the rehearsal period again because Michael, Severus is still, you know, and doing Sweeney Todd. We have to wait till that's over with. And I said, okay. I said, but I have something else to tell you. The new producers on it have a feeling that nobody knows who Lottie Lenny is, that we need to give the role to someone who has a Tony Award. Would you be willing to do another role in the show and be the understudy? I know you're disappointed. Just think about it. And I did. I hung up the phone. I sobbed. I said, that's why I left New York. It's so frustrating. But my son had just called, and he'd been off to college. His name is Huckleberry. And he said, Mom, think for a minute. You're going to go back to Broadway. Maybe not through the front door, through the back door, but you're in the house. So say yes. So I called Hal immediately. I said, sure, of course I'm coming. Well, I had a ball because I've done the workshop. I knew the show. It was like, it was fine. And it ended up being Donna Murphy. Donna Murphy and I came to New York around the same time. We've known each other. We've been friends, So I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. It's fine, blah, 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 blah. And then she heard her voice from a matinee. And the dressers said, you better be ready to go on. She's not going to be able to go on into the show. And I said, oh, no, she'll be fine. She's not going to miss the show. She'll just rest her voice. She'll just mark the show. And then, when we moved, because we're supposed to move to an off-Broadway, a smaller Broadway house, it'll be fine. Nope. And I had so much fun. So I remember Hal coming to the dressing room. They had no time really to do anything. He said, I have only one note from the first act. I only have one note. I said, is it an A flat? And he laughed. He said, no. You're shorter than Donna. You're going to have to sit up higher in the boat when you spread your legs or the joke doesn't land. Things like that.
Yes, just let me know how happy you'll be. Make sure I can see how brightly you smile, how you feel for her. Describe it to me. Find words to convey her inexpressible style. Otto begs me to make a baby with him. I think maybe I do it.
Hal was always Uncle Hal. And every time I came to New York, I would go into his office and we would have coffee and sit and chat. And he'd always say, wait a minute, stop talking, Annie. I have to put my hearing aids in because you're just way too interesting. He was my mentor, because I've written some plays and he'd, yeah. No, I love it.
It's just amazing because, you hear so many stories about don't meet your heroes, they always disappoint you. And it seemed for whatever reason, this production of Merrily, these two giants who could have, I guess, been quote unquote justified at being awful weren't. That doesn't seem to be anyone's interpretation.
They might be to other people, but they weren't to us. I can only talk about my experience. And I loved those men. And my last memory of Stephen Sondheim was when Bonnie and Jim and I were invited to come up and sing at Hal Prince's memorial. And we were to come and do Old Friends and to do the original choreography. And I had to fly up because I was doing a show down in Florida. So I had to fly up to do that and then back down again. Lin-Manuel was sitting in the front row just across the aisle from Steve, because he told me later that, Annie, you should have seen Steve's face. It was like, he was so excited. So I went down to thank Judy Prince and Daisy Prince for inviting us to be in this. But I said, why Old Friends at Hal's memorial? I mean, Merrily was not a successful show for him. And they said, because Old Friends says everything about her dad. And I said, even the fight in the middle?
Right.
The fight in the middle. So I came down to thank them for giving and there was Steve, who was shuffling his feet because he's like 90 now, and trying to be careful not to fall. And he looks at me and he goes, Annie!
Oh, that's sweet. Talking about that creation, though, and rehearsal process, that whole thing, you got to create the role of Mary Flynn. You are the first person who got to do that. I guess what I want to ask is, what do you like about Mary? What aspects of that character did you enjoy embodying?
Oh, yeah. Well, the original play.
Yeah.
People say that the role of Julia, who's
that's right,
kind of Mary Flynn of that, is modeled after Dorothy Parker because they were all friends. That they had their connection of friends that they modeled stuff after. When I was auditioning for Merrily, Ron Field, who was the choreographer, came up to see Keystone before I went to see audition for Hal, because he wanted to see who the possible Mary Flynn might be. And he came running into my dressing room and he said, I think you have a really great shot of being a Mary Flynn. I just want to give you a couple tips. He says, do you happen to know who Mary Rogers is? I said, yeah, she's Richard Rogers' daughter. She's Once Upon a Mattress. She's Freaky Friday. She practically grew up with Stephen Sondheim. And he said, think Mary Rogers. So for me, I was thinking that relationship, not the Dorothy Parker, even though I had my mom and dad who taught me everything. So I had very aware of who Dorothy Parker was. But for me, even in the modern world, since Steve and Mary grew up together, they were like brothers. They were very close. In fact, I think they were thinking about getting married at one point. Who knows? But I figured I had to model it after her. And years later, I was talking to Mana Allen, who was also in our show. And she grew up in musical. There's a person you should to talk to is Mana Allen, because she also teaches Sondheim. But Mana was saying, because she heard that story when I was telling it in my show. She said, "Oh my God, I can't believe we've never had this conversation, Annie." Because I always thought, originally they wanted me to understudy Mary Flynn. And I was thinking, well, of course she must be like Mary Rogers. Yeah.
Did you ever meet Mary Rogers?
Yes, I finally got to work with her. She hired me to do Hey Love, which was a song cycle of her music. And I got to work with her. My son was about 9 years old at the time, and he was ADHD, and I had to bring him with me. And she was so wonderful with him. She got to calm him down. She would write on his back an I, and he'd have to guess what that was, and she'd write an L. Oh.
Yes, V.
Yeah. Yeah. She was a dear. Gave him Freaky Friday. Things to bring home. Yeah. She was a lovely woman. So it was so fun to watch her and say, wow, I kind of nailed that.
That's amazing. Well, and now I have this kind of running theory that I've been proposing, and you can now tell me that I'm probably wrong. I'm always interested to know, like, what is the fatal flaw, or like what is the thing that this character is butting up against? And to me, it seems like Mary is just so stuck in the past that she can't get forward in time. But I don't know, was that something that you took, or were you even thinking about it in that way?
I tell this in the show, and it's a funny story. When we did the first read through of the show, and the press was there, and the documentary team was there, and all the blah 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 blah, we finished reading the script, and Jason Alexander, who was also making his Broadway debut, leans into me and he says, "I think we're in trouble." I mean, we were aware that, and I said, "What? These are the musical theater gods. They'll fix it, right?" I mean, we were aware that there were things wrong with the show. Never with the music. Never with the music. The music was brilliant. And I think when I finally went into the Sitz probe and was listening to the 25-piece orchestra and sitting in the middle of that, did I hear Jonathan Tunic's arrangement and hearing the brilliance of the storytelling within the music, and how Jonathan Tunick was able to continue that storytelling so beautifully. But the flaw was always George Firth's book. And I still think it is. I know that when you do Merrily, it's always going to be George Firth's book. The Merrily that I liked the best so far was Fiasco Theater's production of it, where they had about 6 characters. They did it kind of in an off-Broadway.
Oh, interesting.
It was probably my most favorite so far, because they worked again with Steve at exploring things. And maybe some things didn't work, like they tried to put in one of the original, something else from the original book. Might not quite worked well. But they put Rich and Happy back in and got rid of That's Frank, because I never got That's Frank. That's one thing that does it. The storytelling's better when it's Rich and Happy. That's my opinion, okay? But it's always been, for me, it's always been George Firth's book. I just felt like, I don't think he really fully understood the characters enough.
Right.
So whenever I see a production of Merrily, the later versions of it, there's changes, but they're just lateral changes.
Yeah, there's no big changes. Nothing that fundamentally changes the book.
And for instance, like, here's a thought. Why is Mary... All right, so we get to the very end of the play, The Rooftop, which, by the way, when anyone asks me if there's any advice about doing Merrily, I say, don't forget the rooftop. That is the most important scene of the show. It's what it's all about. Whenever you get lost, go back to the rooftop. Why would Mary, we hear at the very end, he says, this is the girl I should probably marry, because she makes that. Now, why does she hold a flame for that all the way through the show? Some way there's unrequited love. I understand that. But if Mary was successful, wouldn't she have been much more successful? Like, why did she write with them? Wouldn't that be more fun if the three of them wrote together? What if she was the book writer, he was the lyricist, and Frank was the composer? How much more richer that relationship would have been? What if she became if she was a novelist, what if she was extremely successful? What if she had many marriages? So that when we get to the, so there's I don't know. It's just I have all these thoughts, and I had it then and I still do.
I think that's just the amazing part, and possibly the longevity of this show, which I keep coming back to, which is love the music. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's some of the best that Sondheim wrote. The book is a bit of a mess. Yeah. But the reason people keep coming back to it is that there's kernels throughout. I was like, oh yeah, like this totally rings true. This totally rings true. This maybe not so much. Maybe there's not so much. Yeah, but man, that ending is so good. Yeah.
I still get letters. Well, not letters, but emails or connection from people that say, I'm the Mary of a Charlie Mary Frank, or I'm the Frank Charlie Mary. I'm the Charlie of. Right. And I listen to that album over and over again. It makes me cry.
Yeah.
Long for that relationship, because the shows, I had to borrow a line from my son to put in my show. He says, it's a cautionary tale of success. Yeah, sort of, but it's really about friendships.
Yeah.
And for me, we came to New York, us guys, and you make these great friends that sometimes go on forever. And then there's someone who just life took them in a different direction, and it goes, and it's sad. And we all have that. And it affects us in different sort of ways. But that's something everybody can relate to. And I think it's one of the charms of the show.
Well, talking about like the reception of the show now versus then, like, did you ever get a sense at the time, like, were there Merrily fans? Like, I know there's the oft told, like, it failed, sure. But were there Merrily fans that you got interactions with at the time, or did that only come later?
This is 1981, all right? And Al decided not to preview out of town. It saved money not to do that. There were all kinds of reasons. And he now realizes that was a mistake. He also repeated that again with La Musique, and it didn't go out of town. So what happens is the difference between La Musique, because there now you had the internet and you had phones and all that. Back then, people, if they didn't like it, during intermission, they would run to the payphone and call and say, this show is shit,
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing about Hal Prince is the preview period. That's where he does his magic, because he pays attention to what's going on in the audience. And then he can go, okay, this is not working, this gets fixed. So for $5, you could stand in the back of the balcony to watch the show. And for $10 during that preview period, you could stand in back of the orchestra and watch the show. And there were people who saw that show 28 times. Well, that was Betty kind of native green. They saw 28 times. They came to the show with their T-shirt that said audience on it.
Yeah.
But there were people who saw it many times, and I still hear people, oh yeah, I saw the preview 4 times. Oh, I saw it 3 times. Oh, I saw it 7 times. And for those people, it was a master class on musical theater development. I think that was, so there were people who, by the time the show had opened, were huge fans of the show, even though that they knew that there was flaws. By the time we opened, we probably could have limped along much farther than we did, but the word of mouth was just so bad.
Right.
Yeah, and at that time, Frank Rich had a lot of power. Those people, maybe not so much now, but you could really close a show very quickly. And Hal was like, he wanted to have it filmed, filmed so that maybe that the money coming in for that the show could limp along a little bit. But it just seemed like everything was being taken away. That was taken away. I was told we almost didn't do the album if we didn't do it right after the show, and that
which is a miracle unto itself that it even did get a cast recording, which I'm so glad there was. But
oh my God, are you kidding? And what I think why it's one of people's favorites, and it's my favorite of all the Merrillys, partly because I love certain things that are in it that didn't keep things changed, was that you really hear our feelings on it. Because we had to go in the recording studio the day after closing.
Yeah. Like post Merrily, like what are some of your highlights? Like what are some other shows that you're so glad you got to be a part of?
Oh God, there are lots of them. I think I'm the kind of actor that loves everything she does. So the next thing is...
I don't know what your feelings are on this show, but I was actually only recently, like within the last few months, introduced to Peg.
Oh, yeah.
I'm really loving a lot of the music from that show.
Well, Peg, that's a sweet show, because that was my West End debut as a star. And that was in 84?
Something like that, yeah.
It had to be, because my son was born in 85 and he was conceived in London. So, but And he didn't come out with an English accent. I don't understand that. Anyway.
Yeah, that's weird.
That's strange. I got to work with David Henniker, who was the composer of that.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the book, again, was the problem. It was written by Maggie Thatcher's speechwriter.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Okay.
And it just, it's like she didn't want any of the sentiment of Peg in My Heart. So it just lost a lot of its heart, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they really wanted an American actress to play the role. They could have very easily hired someone there, but Lou Bush-Hager of the Anheuser-Busch was the main producer on that, the lead producer, and he really wanted to bring an American person over. That was a funny audition, too, because it was down to the four of us for a callback, and they flew us to London to do it there. So I was with Maureen McNamara, wonderful little actress with beautiful red hair, curly red hair. She looked very Irish. She looked like she should have been Peg. Right. There was Christine Ebersol and Elizabeth Mastronio. Was that right? I think it was the four of us. And it was like being a part of a beauty contest. We all roomed together. We were wined and dined. We were chauffeured around town because it was Lil Bush-Hager. What do you know? And we ended up, but I had to know, I had to know before I left London that I had gotten the job. And Christine and Elizabeth decided to go all over the rest of the continent of Europe. And I had to go back to the States with little Maureen, who was sobbing her eyes out because she was just sure she was going to get the role. But that was a funny, again, it was the book that was a problem. But David Henniker was a dear to work with. That whole figuring out Manhattan hometown. I had done bunches of backers auditions for that show here in the States first. And he had come and he said, I got a song I want to write for Peg. Is Manhattan, can you see it like a little small town? I said, oh, you're kidding? God, depend by block, you know? Mm-hmm. So we had a long discussion about that. And the next morning I came down and he said, I got a song for you. Says, let me take you to my hometown. Sweet Manhattan, NYC. Oh, it's just a wonderful little song. And it ended up being like the 11 o'clock number for the show.
So come and see my hometown, where I was born. Of that famous Aubrey town, singing serenades till dawn. So come and see my hometown, my sweet Manhattan hometown. Come share with me my hometown, where I
Like you have already mentioned, you do have this cabaret show, Merrily, from Center Stage. But
And now
I
it's
think people are
considered
going to
a theater piece.
That's right. You have to push your glasses up before you actually talk about it. But do you, people are going to have a chance to see this because it's actually kind of going around the country a little bit.
I believe so. I just put it in when I first did it at 54 Below in New York, which is a wonderful cabaret room, and they just won a Tony Award because they also do a lot of theatrical pieces as well. And I was invited by Jennifer Tepper, who books the room, if I would come. This was back in December, before I was going to go May a show, and so COVID was still an issue. We weren't sure what was going on with the COVID world, especially in New York. And I said, sure, I would love to come and do a show. She said, well, you could do whatever you want to. I said, well, I'd have this, furniture set show that I've done, and I only did it once there. She said, yeah, or you could do a Sondheim thing. I said, yeah, or I could do it. I did. Oh, yeah, or you could do a Sondheim thing. I said, do you want to do a Sondheim thing? She said, yeah. I said, isn't New York sick of Sondheim? She said, no, we're never sick of Sondheim. So I got this idea because in the documentary, That's the Worst Thing That Ever Going to Happen, a lot of things went on the cutting room floor because Lonnie had found this wonderful footage.
Yeah, that's right.
The documentary. And so it just changed the narrative of his piece. So a lot of things that I talked about were no longer part of it because my journey into the show was much later. And I thought about it and I thought, maybe I need to tell that story. And so that's how I developed the piece. Well, I had a limitation. It only could be 75 minutes long. Right. And so there were things that I had to not be able to put in there because it's really about a 90-minute piece. So I just put it into a workshop down here in Florida, and I got it where I want it. And we're thinking about bringing it back to New York to do a recording of it for a special. Mm-hmm. Keep your fingers crossed. Yeah. I'm being wooed to come to London. I'm being wooed to do it out in California. I'm being wooed to do some places. So I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think it's got a life.
Yeah. Well, we'll put it out into the universe. We'll actualize this.
It might be to Canada.
Yeah, that would be great. Super great. And this has been so lovely. This is such a great talk to learn more about you, your career, Merrily and stuff, of course.
We could talk another 2 hours, you know.
Oh, I know. That's the thing. It's like we could just keep on rolling. If people wanted to stay in contact or get in contact with you, is there a way that you advertise?
My website is www.annemorrison.net. You can contact me there, or you can go right to my, which will lead me into A. Morrison, and it's 2R Morrison, amorrison.sarasolo@gmail.com, because I'm the artistic director of Sarasolo Productions. So yes. I still kind of have a link in that whole thing. I'm kind of getting off social media. You know, Jonathan Groff, they're doing Merrily, soon, obviously in New York. And Jonathan Groff is going to be playing Franklin Shepard. And he came to see my show at 54 Below.
Oh, nice.
He said, "You've got to do this everywhere. You've got to do the show everywhere. You've got to do it for a company." And I said, "Okay, sure. I'd love to do." So, Jonathan Groff, I'm excited about it.
What a good pick for Frank, by the way. I think it's a great casting. Yeah.
And I think Daniel Radcliffe's going to be wonderful, Charlie. And they got Lindsay Mendez, who's hilarious and fun. I think she's going to add a lot of comedy and understanding in Mary. So I kind of hope we get to see it because, So who knows? We'll see.
Merrily continues on. It continues its journey on from flop to huge can't get tickets on Broadway. So,
and don't forget, the best thing to remember about Merrily is our time.
It's our time. Breathe in. Worlds to change and worlds to win.
Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network, to Alberta Blue Cross, and to Park Power this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. So consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we get to talk to Frank himself. Jim Walton is going to be a guest next week. We'll find out if he's just that frank or rich and happy. As always, a big thank you to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and to Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.